Good evening, hello and welcome. You're watching Viewpoint. I'm Anusha Soni. The latest maps released by China are clearly meant to provoke. The latest edition of official maps released by China for national and international consumption show Arunachal Pradesh, the Indian state, as Chinese territory. Not just that, Aksai, Taiwan are also shown as parts of People's Republic of China. Using maps to rake up nationalistic sentiments within China has been a tried and tested strategy of the Chinese Communist Party. The fact that these maps have been released right before the G20 Summit slated to happen in the national capital and right after the BRICS Summit is clearly an indication from the Chinese. The stubborn resistance of the Chinese authorities to walk the talk, the much-known Chinese tactic of one step forward and two steps backward is well known across the world. But how would India deal with such a neighbor? With opposition training guns at the ruling government, will there be a real solution to the situation at the LAC? Will these bilateral differences emerge at the all-crucial G20 Summit? Our focus on Viewpoint tonight.
बार पर ये प्रोवोक करते रहा कि अरुणाचल हमारा है, वो फलाना हमारा, ये हमारा, इससे करके ये बोलते रहता। अभी था हमारा बॉर्डर के बीच में भारत और चीन के बीच में बहुत वार्ता हुआ था, लेकिन कभी भी हाल नहीं होगा क्योंकि ये कभी नहीं होगा, क्योंकि चीन और भारत के बीच में कोई बॉर्डर नहीं है। बॉर्डर तब से बनाया जब चीन ने तिब्बत को ऑक्युपाइड किया, कब्जा किया, तब से चीन और भारत का बीच में बॉर्डर बनाया। उसका पहला 1 इंच पे चीन और भारत का बीच में बॉर्डर नहीं पड़ता था।
प्रधानमंत्री ने देखना चाहिए। अभी ब्रिक्स में गए थे तो चाइना के प्रीमियर को मिलकर आए हैं, गले लगाए हैं हमेशा की तरह, और उसके बाद तो चाइना का मैप आता है तो ये सवाल जो है उनको पूछना चाहिए, आपको कैसा लगता है?
Given the fact that the frontier in the western sector was undemarcated, these myths which the BJP keeps running, that Nehru gave up 38,000 square kilometers to China, is historically absolutely incorrect. Only an intellectually challenged person can make such a obnoxious claim. To sum it up, so therefore the Chinese maps are preposterous. They are not in sync with the history of the Sino-Indian border dispute.
Well, before we dip into the discussion, here's a piece of breaking news coming in. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has reacted to China's move, and he has said that putting out a map doesn't mean anything at all. Territories belong to India. That's something that he's clearly reiterated. That's the word coming in from none other than the External Affairs Minister of India. A very clear position that India has taken on this issue even earlier, when Arunachal Pradesh was shown as some kind of disputed territory or part of China. The Chinese authorities have been doing these things with their maps even earlier as well. India had stated a very clear position. Let me check if Abhishek Jha is with us on the broadcast to give us more details. But Dr. Jaishankar has hit back at China. He has made it abundantly clear that any kind of map issued by the Chinese authorities internationally and for India is meaningless. My colleague Abhishek Jha joining us on the broadcast, getting us more details on that story. Abhishek, a very clear assertion of stand by India. None other than the External Affairs Minister has spoken about it.
Of course, and he has known as Jaishankar for his, very fair and frank remarks. And on the issue of China, he has clearly said that it looks like really absurd. And if a country, brings a map, keeping together the pieces and the territory of other countries, it can very well do that, but it would not change the reality. He's also said that India has seen such reports in the past also, and this is not the first time that China has made such an attempt. And we reject it outright. This is what Jaishankar has said on the issue of China's new map, which has included Aksai, and also the parts of Arunachal Pradesh as extended part of southern Tibet.
Abhishek, going forward ahead of G20, what does this clear assertion of stand by the minister really mean? How does it translate?
You see, it wouldn't have been, nice, but Chinese have asked for it because ever since the Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping's candid conversation, it was being expected that there would be some sort of calmness or non-provocative attitude from the Chinese side, especially when the G20 is going to come. But it doesn't look like China is very keen on having an improved and normal bilateral relationship because these kind of provocation and boundary disputes not being settled would not bring a new era of China-India relationship, and it will overshadow other dynamics of bilateral relationship as well.
Absolutely. It will overshadow those dynamics, and it's not the best thing that has happened, but as my colleague said, China asked for it, and it's a clear assertion coming in from India. Thank you, Abhishek, for joining us on the broadcast and getting us all the details and perspective on that statement of the External Affairs Minister. Dipping into this debate about what do these maps really mean, will they really overshadow the bilateral relations? It seems like that they would. More importantly, the tensions that have existed along the line of factual control ever since 2020, will they really escalate? There are various friction points where de-escalation is yet to happen. A complete withdrawal is the ideal, but that has not happened. And the manner in which the Chinese have conducted themselves, or they've not really walked the talk, is something that has concerned the Indian authorities. It's not just India, but territories like Tibet and Taiwan and various other neighbors of China have been at the receiving end when it comes to the expansionist policies of the CCP. Joining us on the broadcast is Dawa Sering, who's a Tibetan MP. We also have Tenpa Yarfel, who will be joining us in just some time from now. Both are from the Tibetan Parliament, the government in exile. Thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Dawa Sering, coming to you first, taking in a view from you. The manner in which Chinese have released their maps, it's not something that they have done for the first time. But it's clearly something that encroaches upon the sovereignty of various nations, including the Tibetan cause.
Yes. Okay, this is not the first time the Chinese were provocating the neighboring countries. Since the Chinese communists was incepted in 1949. Since that, the Chinese expansionist policy was started, and after that, in 1959, the Chinese has occupied the Tibet, forcefully occupied the Tibet. After that, even the Indian government had an agreement of Panchil. They betrayed the Indian and they made an aggression on 1962. We said China India bye-bye, but they betrayed to the Indians. So they have no. It is whatever the map released by the China or what they are claiming or provoking the Indian or other neighbors. They are totally condemnable and illegal. No right, no meaningful for that, because there was no any border between India and China before 1959. There's even an inches or even an inch as no border. So now after occupation of Tibet in 1959, then so-called Indian and China borders exist. Otherwise, there's no border at all. So there's no right for the China to claim such thing.
Absolutely. Mr. Sushant Sareen, I want you to open the debate and discussion for us tonight. The External Affairs Minister has spoken, and he has spoken in unambiguous words and terms, and he has said that these maps are meaningless, they mean nothing. A clear assertion by India, something that has been done earlier as well. But what are the Chinese trying to do? They have done it earlier, but the fact that it happened so close to G20, right after the BRICS summit, there was a statement as well that had come from both the sides. LAC tensions were spoken of. There was some hope that the bilateral relationships could be eased in the times to come. But with these maps, it doesn't seem like.
Yeah, it doesn't. I think what Dr. Jaishankar said is to the point. These are absurd claims. Not for the first time are the Chinese making these kind of claims. They keep making these claims.
Yeah.
But look, here is the thing. Cartographic aggression is part of what the Chinese lawfare is all about.
Sure.
Right? They do this and then they start, staking their claim, and then they go ahead and they start capturing or encroaching on territories. They've done it in South China Sea. They've done it in a number of other places. So I look at this, even though these are utterly ridiculous kind of claims from the Chinese side, I look at these as a kind of a statement of intention coming from the Chinese. which means that if indeed it is a statement of intention, which is backed by military capabilities which are already present along India's borders, then this is not something we should take lightly, which means that any hopes that anybody was harboring of that three-stage kind of a movement along the LAC, which was disengagement and then de-escalation and de-induction of troops, I don't think that's really on the anvil anytime soon. So fine, if that's the game the Chinese want to play, I don't see how we have any other choice but to play that same game.
Sure.
I don't think we are going to back down from whatever the Chinese are trying to do. And that is where matters stand. But at the same time, I think at the strategic level, if the Chinese intention is that, by trying to browbeat us, they will prevent India from doing many things on the international diplomatic front, including get close to the Americans, then I think what they are ultimately achieving is quite the opposite of what they are trying to do. And then, of course, Anushka, there is this whole issue of, India, this is the game two can play. And I think this is the game India should play. For example, we've already stopped talking about a one China policy.
Yeah.
So I think, as far as Tibet is concerned, in the maps which we bring out, we should show Tibet as in different colors
as an autonomous region
from China's colors. We can play this game.
Yeah.
So if this is the game the Chinese want to play, I think we are pretty adept at playing the same game.
Well, you suggest that India should take a far more stronger view, and I mean, who knows, the Chinese may see it as an escalation of sort. We also have Keone Everington, who's the senior editor of Taiwan News, Jennifer Zeng, who's a member of the International Press Association and journalist at Inconvenient Truths, is also joining us on the broadcast. Keone Everington, coming to you first. When it comes to Taiwan, that particular region has been on the receiving end, and the entire conflict with the Chinese is very well known. In fact, last year we had also seen an escalation of sorts. This kind of aggression by the Chinese, or the assertion by the Chinese, do you think that the international community in some way can be successful in containing these efforts from the Chinese? Because so far it seems like that all the efforts have gone in vain. They have dug their heels, they have stuck to their stand, and they don't respect the sovereignty of other nations.
Well, talking about the map, the presence of Taiwan in the map specifically, even the U.S. government struggles to be consistent with itself. And so even the U.S. government, when it comes to the State Department, the Pentagon, many government agencies also sometimes include Taiwan in the map. And that's what the Congress is working on right now, to try and legislate, making that consistent, that no, these are different countries, you must put Taiwan in as a different color or a different label. So even the U.S. government itself struggles to properly label Taiwan as a separate country on its own maps. So if the U.S. government can't do that, it's even worse when it comes to Hollywood and like products that are sold to consumers that show the map as Taiwan part of China. The average globe that you see, because so many of those things are made in China, right? And so it's a real struggle, and we're not even on. What needs to happen is there needs to be a much more united effort across the government and in the private sector to get on the same page and label, just starting with getting Taiwan as a separate entity on the map.
That's an interesting point. Yeah,
they're not doing what you're saying. They're not. Governments are not standing up enough to China. And they're sending mixed signals, and you can see that even though China is very belligerent to the U.S. in many ways, it's the U.S. that keeps sending envoys over, and that sends a bad signal, because it shows to the CCP that looks like weakness. It looks like their strategy is working. Their strategy of intimidation seems to be having the desired effect.
Seems to be. Why do you say that it's having the desired effect? I mean, if you were to substantiate that.
Right. So, because basically the U.S. is willing to make make concessions, or appear to want to make concessions. And I think there was like an instance of what was it? It was some sort of...
I do get the larger point that you're making, because even on the Taiwan issue, as you pointed out, from the US side as well, there has been a lot of back and forth, and they also wanted a de-escalation of sorts when the tensions were high. Jennifer Zeng, do you agree that the Chinese or the dragon has not been tamed? The international community, especially the US, wants this Chinese expansionist policy to be contained in some way. India is a strategic partner in that sense. But when it comes to, say, for example, an issue like Taiwan, on that even the American government has not been consistent. That's what many experts argue.
Yes, I think it is very important to understand why the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, wants to do this now and how the international world should respond. I think the CCP's this move is, for me, it's surprising, but of course it's not surprising. Not surprising is because from day one of the founding of the so-called communism, their ideology, their aspiration is so-called liberate the entire humanity. So, and the CCP has been expanding its whatever very aggressive foreign policy in all these years. But surprising is now because China is having extremely huge financial problems, social problems, economic problems. You would imagine for a normal thinking leader, they would try to focus on recover or to mend the economy first, instead of doing this kind of mending the map that will surely draw more, I think, negative, or I say response for the CCP. Why they would do it now? So another issue to pay attention is actually the logic under this is the serious or the worse the situation inside China is, the more possible that they would initiate some external issue to divert the attention and actually I think China
So you believe that the internal turmoil in China is so high right now that they are using these issues to divert attention, and in fact this was the same argument that was advanced by many people when the COVID crisis was at its peak, that to divert the attention or accountability, that's exactly what China is doing. Mr. Sushant Sureen, I'm coming back to you. And Mr. Dava Sering is with us on the broadcast. You spoke of an interesting topic, say, for example, Tibet or Taiwan. But do you really think that India can take a position that strong? For example, countries like US have not been able to be as consistent as they would like to be, say, on an issue like Taiwan. Do you think India is able to afford that? Many critics argue, in fact, the opposition parties here in India argue, that the government has not been as straightforward and direct in confronting the Chinese, at least on a foreign policy level or in the diplomatic arena, as they should have been. Do you think that criticism is well founded?
No, my question to that criticism would be, what would the opposition have us do? Declare war?
Yeah.
I mean, if the Chinese were trying to dare India and bring troops on the Indian borders, the Indian army and the Indian government responded with the necessary amount of force levels to stop the Chinese in their tracks. When it comes to Indian diplomacy, you've heard the Foreign Minister, External Affairs Minister speak very, very candidly, very, very openly, very bluntly on what he thinks of the Chinese, and why he is very clear that unless the Chinese back off, relations cannot go back to normalcy. Now, what else would the opposition want us to do? Personally, I think, yes, a lot of things which the Americans have not been able to do, for whatever reason they have not been able to do. Maybe there are Chinese lobbies which are buying out support in America. We've known this, that American academia is sold out to many Chinese interests. We've seen American politicians being sold out to Chinese interests. We've seen a whole lot of this stuff happening in American media, for that matter.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the reason, but in India, for example, I would not be surprised if India was to, because look at the way India has confronted the Chinese. Who else in the entire region has had scraps with the Chinese, physical scraps? Who else has had virtually a competition for territory where the Indians go and occupy certain strategic heights, and then the Chinese are forced to back down. Who else has done stuff like this, right? So if, for example, just as a tit for tat, it doesn't mean anything, drawing lines on the map, as Jaishankar says, that, you can draw as many lines as you want on the map, it means nothing. It doesn't change the reality on the ground. But yeah, if this is what the Chinese want to give,
so you believe, say for the cause of Tibet, this is something that Indians can do. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, Anusha, don't we already publish our maps in which we show Arunachal part of India? We show the entire Aksai chain as a part of India, right? And we've been doing that consistently for the last 75 years. Now, what else would the opposition want us to do? Or maybe they should tell us. Does the opposition actually think bringing out a white paper will solve everything between India and China? And if the government does indeed bring out a white paper, do you think the opposition will accept it and stop raising these very, puerile kind of points which they keep raising of how many 1,000 square kilometers of territory have been lost without specifying when thousands of kilometers were lost? So, that's politics, that will continue. But I think by and large, the Indian side is playing this game as good as it can be played.
I'll quickly take in a word from Mr. Dawa Sering, talk about the Tibetan cause and what the government in exile has been saying for a very long time. Mr. Sering, you think that the release of maps by, say, a country like India or any other nation which is sympathetic to the cause of Tibet and showing it as an autonomous region will help your, cause or the fight that the government in exile has been fighting for decades? Many argue that the Chinese occupation has, existed for far too long, and Tibet is a gone cause. But the government in exile continues to fight for it.
Yes, definitely. We are today. We are in a Jammu. Me and my colleagues are here on behalf of the Tibetan government in exile to make awareness, to get the support from the Indian people and the Indian government, and to thank the Indian government. The people have been very helpful for last 60 years in exile. So what my before speaker said, the Chinese releasing such a kind of map is nothing. It's just on a paper. I mean, they have no right to claim anything like that because, as I told, the border is between the Tibet and China, and they have no right whatever they claim. And I just want to tell or request to the Indian government and people that now the Indians should, because the Chinese been provocating like such things for last 60 or 17 years. Now we should, the Indian is not today, 23, Indian is not like in 1962. Now we should politically, for the benefits of the Indian and for the Tibet, the Indian should stand more strong, politically stand for against the Chinese.
To what extent how strongly can the Indians really take that position? Many argue that India has already taken a very strong position. I'm going to Keone Everington once again and Jennifer Zeng as well. Talking about the G20 Summit, which is set to happen here in India. The bilateral ties between India and China and the difficult issue of the tensions along the LAC. Keone Everington, do you think, in your learned opinion, those tensions in some way can cloud the summit or in some way can have an implication on it?
I think, sorry.
Can I have Keone Everington and then I'll go to Jennifer Zeng.
Will these tensions, could you repeat the question? It's kind of breaking up. I couldn't hear the question.
I'm talking about the tensions that exist between India and China and the possible or the plausible effect, if at all it could have on the G20 summit, the upcoming summit.
Sure. I mean, I think this is obviously a game being played by Beijing, and but I think it's not a very good move on the part of Beijing. I really think this was a blunder because it's only going to entail more hostility by India, and so I don't really understand why they did this. I mean, obviously, here in Taiwan, we're very used to this kind of thing, and it didn't really make waves here. But timing, I think, is really, really poor, and it could be, is it another case of one really aggressive part of the government doing this while the top leadership is not aware? I'm not really sure. I mean, because to me, it seems like something that would diminish, sabotage, and take away from attempts to establish better ties between the two countries and hurting the ties between the two countries. I'm not quite sure what benefit that has as far as this upcoming summit goes, other than, I suppose, trying to assert itself as more powerful and.
Yeah, and there was also much talk if there can be a joint statement, if that can happen, if there's a consensus on different issues that can come together. Jennifer Zeng, coming to you and seeing it from the point of view of India and that summit which is likely to happen. You interestingly spoke about the internal issues of China and why perhaps that's pushing the present regime in China to take such strong measures. The timing of the release of these maps, what does it indicate to you? And what is the message, say, for a country like India or for a region like Taiwan?
Actually, I think there is a great issue maybe many people have not realized yet inside China, which is under Xi Jinping's absolutely power. I think many lower level officials are now prefer not to do anything. Also, so Xi Jinping's decision now, I think many of his decisions now are out of touch with the reality. He may not really know what's happening in the real world. So maybe this is a policy that they've already decided or made long ago, but they don't do adjustment according to what is happening inside the world and inside China. So they release it no matter what. But the other danger is for me, if I were in China now, or I were a Chinese official, I would be very worried about the ever escalation in you can say conflicts with neighboring countries and with the worsening environment, international environment, and worsening domestic issues.
But Jennifer, it seems like that the Chinese are doing it on purpose because they've consistently done it. These are not episodes that have happened and gotten over. This is a consistent behavior by a government, by a country, and consistent behaviors tell you the nature of a particular being. In this case, a particular country. Mr. Sushant Sareen, I want you to give the closing comments, the timing of it, the message for India, and what does it mean for the upcoming G20 summit.
So I wouldn't be surprised if there's absolutely no meeting between India and China during the G20 summit. And I think the Chinese will be responsible for that, simply because it's not just the G20. The statement which was issued by the Chinese Foreign Office was in bad taste after the BRICS summit. And very clearly there was no progress out there. And the meeting between the Prime Minister and the Chinese Emperor was basically, it was just kind of a pull aside. And I don't think there is any great mood in India to be seen to be engaging with the Chinese at the summit level at this point in time. I wouldn't be surprised if there is some kind of signaling from the Indian side. For example, if the Prime Minister was to go to the airport to receive President Biden, but a joint secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs was to go and receive Xi Jinping.
Sure.
I think it conveys, how the two stack up.
Yeah.
And the Chinese would, of course, will have a fire lit up in the wrong places of their anatomy, but so be it. So I think there are many things that can be done, as a kind of a signaling, and that is the direction in which things are headed. I don't think the Chinese are likely to understand the language that, we need to disengage, we need to have peace and tranquility. They'll keep mouthing those words, but I don't think they're not going to follow it up. And I think we need to be prepared for that. And I think Mr. Everington did mention something which was very important. We are Eastern societies. There are certain signals which go out, and what the Americans are doing, for example, with China, the constant sending delegations, trying to engage with the Chinese. The Chinese are not seeing that as Americans trying to, engage in diplomacy to try and solve some of the, smoothen out some of the rough edges. They are seeing it as American weakness.
Absolutely.
And I think the Americans are so woke and so stupid at times that they are not realizing that the kind of signals they are sending are very negative signals and very counterproductive to what they are hoping to achieve.
Very candidly
and
said.
They're shooting themselves in the foot by doing it. But, America is an empire. Who can tell the empire what they should do?
True,
so it is one empire versus an emperor. I don't know how the world is going to unfold.
Interesting comments there by Mr. Sushant Sureen. Mr. Dava Sering, Sushant Sureen, Keone Everington, Jennifer Zeng, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. We'd have many more discussions like these in the days to come ahead of that very crucial summit, which is set to happen here in the national capital. Slipping into a very short break, up next on the other side, there are tremors in the alliance called INDIA. As the Congress party's pitch for Rahul Gandhi as the prime ministerial face spreads unease among the allies. Will it be a deal breaker? Quite literally. That debate after a quick break.